his family who have given me a place to stay, and it made it really easy for me to come in and do this kind of work. So thanks. And I wanted to share a funny memory that I have of Vancouver, which I started working really in a heavy way on the research in 1990. And I came up here to give a lecture on what I knew at that point about egalitarian marriages. I didn't realize how much I didn't know. That's, when you start out, you think you know what you're doing, and then 5 years later you realize, how could you even think of giving a lecture? You didn't know anything. But at that time I thought I knew enough, and I came up here, and I gave a lecture, and at the end of the lecture, a guy came up and he said, I really liked your lecture, and it was really, really interesting, but I'm just not that interested in that kind of intimacy. And I thought that was just amazing, because he had put his finger on one of the basic facts about equality, which is that equality has to bring with it intimacy, or it doesn't bring with it happiness. I mean, you can have an equal sharing, and let's say the guy does the cleaning, and he does the washing up, and he does the shopping, and everything, but it's not a happy marriage. But he understood that if it goes well, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, what is equality that brings happiness, and I'll try to touch on what about equality can be bad and make you actually unhappy. And people try to share things 50-50, and they spend all their time trying to figure out if each one's giving as much as the other. That's just one example of what I would call a bad kind of equality, which doesn't bring intimacy. But I thought that was great that started here. Somebody really got it. I wonder why he didn't want intimacy, but that's the therapist side of me talking. I wanted to show you something before we start on the actual material. Let me see if I can do this. We've been practicing before. Did I do it right?
Looks beautiful.
Okay, I want to show you something. It's pretty awful, I know, but it's called the stochastic process. The stochastic process, and it was first written by Gregory Bateson, very well-known anthropologist, married to Margaret Mead, and he had ideas about how people learn things and change and develop their learning. He also happened to believe that this process, which I'm going to tell you about in a second, is true on every level of the universe. I mean, he was really quite amazing. And he said that this is how constellations work, this is how cells in the bodies work and grow. He was talking about growth and development. And I can't say if it works for constellations, and I certainly can't say if it works for our cells. I can say it works for knowledge-based learning, and what happened to me with feminism. So when I first started thinking about feminism in the family, I was here. Now, what is here? Just a lot of different ideas. They're not any system yet. They're just a lot of different ideas. One idea might be family systems theory. Another idea might be behavior therapy. I was trained very much as a behavior therapist. Another idea may be feminism, which I thought you were supposed to keep out of the therapy room because feminism is a political idea, and you're not supposed to bring your political ideas into the room of therapy. So I had all these many, many, many ideas. And at some point, what he talks about is you begin to be overwhelmed. So let's say I start reading a lot about gender. This is really what happened. And I'm reading about gender, and I'm coming upon all these amazing facts that don't make a whole lot of sense in a total way yet, but they're like little bites. Like, for instance, I ran in, because I'm behavioral, I was reading a behaviorist literature, and I ran into a finding that women are recently giving up their jobs of stopping conflict in marriage. That it used to be that in a flow of conversation, usually these things are studied by sociologists or social psychologists. So in the flow of conversation, when it's starting to get conflictual, it used to be the woman who would somehow make it all okay. And women had been abandoning that role. So like that's another little thing here, right? I get that. And another one is that women all over the world are less happy in marriage than the men are, and that women initiate more divorces than men do, and all kinds of things like that, where I start to get overwhelmed. And he says that what you start to do is you get overwhelmed and you start to need to process it as he calls this the consolidation. Did I call it? Yeah. Number 3, consolidation. It's like an overwhelming experience of too many ideas, new ideas, and you got to pick and choose and start to create a system for yourself. And I did. And this whole research I'm telling you about is that system that I created for myself, and it has a lot to do with gender, politics, feminism, family therapy, and how I put them together. Now, you don't just stay there. That's the nice part about this. I love this model, and I've been able to use it in almost anything I'm teaching. So it's extremely useful. It certainly doesn't have anything to do with feminism. It has to do with how people just grow and learn and develop. At some point, you start to feel stagnated. You're still talking to yourself, and did I write that down? Consolidation. So I didn't say the feeling of stagnation, which is here. Okay, so just so that you get it right. Number 4 is the feeling of stagnation, and number 5 is what he calls a jarring event. In other words, you're starting to feel like you're repeating yourself, nothing's new, you don't understand something, and then something happens, or you seek it out, and it shakes you up, and you're back into looking for new information. And you're back into reading again, and doing research again, and then at some point, you've got to create a system from all that new information that you've given, and then you consolidate again. And you can't just stay there because that's like death, it doesn't go anywhere. So at some point you'll have a jarring experience. You'll meet someone, you'll travel to Australia like I did. I met Michael White, did total changes in my thinking. Narrative therapy was one of the most jarring experiences I've ever had. And it opens me up to chaos, because that chaotic kind of experience is part of creativity. Without it, you won't be able to open yourself up to new things. But when it gets to be too much, you start to close down. And you create yourself a new base, which hopefully the idea being that there's some of this and some of this, and the new stuff, and then some of this. This will fit almost anything. Piaget was talking about this. Certainly people in education should know about this, because this is how people learn and develop, And many people say the jarring experience can be a classroom, it can be a therapy room. It could be a loss, it could be a trauma. There's so many things that could do that. So I just thought that would be interesting for you to see, because that's sort of what I went through. And I'm still going through about gender, feminism, therapy, how much should be in there, what else should be in there, what do you do with narrative, how do you put them all together. Any questions about this before we go on? Because I'm just going to leave it. Just any thoughts or what it brings up for you? I love lecturing, but I really love hearing how something touches you or moves you or doesn't, or you don't understand, or anything at all. It's just completely clear? Really? Okay. Come on, Itai, you can think of a question. No questions. Where is Itai? Who took him away? Okay. All right. You don't have to have a question.
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
When does this model not work? Or have you found, let's say, in your experience, when it doesn't work so well?
That's a fantastic question. Really it is. Because I think I haven't given much thought to it the way you're saying it, but now that you're saying it, I can just put it together that sometimes the jarring experience can be so traumatic that there isn't the reconsolidation, there's a kind of falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
A rape, a war, terrorism, maybe a divorce, a traumatic kind of divorce. I could see where that experience would not, the process of growth would get stopped. Mm-hmm. But this is good to know, because as you get people in therapy, you start to think, where are they in their lives about some of these things? Are they swimming around with, like, in the age of 50, they don't know what to be and who who they are, Or are they 30 and feeling totally stuck in something, they're not able to move out of it because they decided decisions at 20 that now in 30, it doesn't feel right anymore. So there's a lot of therapeutic help you can get from this, I think. Yeah.
So how would you use this in a therapy session, depending on where a person is?
And amazingly, and I'm glad you got that, this can also be a therapy session. That's why he was so brilliant. He said it actually does, he says it's everything, which is really hard to grasp, but yeah, you come into the therapy session, the person's all over the place, let's say. You don't know what they're gonna come in. They may come in with a rigid idea, and that's it, you know. My wife is supposed to be cooking. She stopped cooking, she's gone back to work, and I'm really upset, and he's just stuck right there with an old model. It's not working. And the jarring experience is his wife is going to leave it. So, but you know that, yes, and very much inside the therapy session, you have some of that, and keeping your pulse here. I don't really want to go too much into this because I could do a whole lecture just on this. Keeping your pulse on that is important. Are people getting opened up too much and then they need closing down? Or are they getting closed down and they need something to open them up? And where would you like to leave them when they leave the session, let's say, ideally? Any thoughts about, like, would you like to leave them here, all these millions of ideas swimming in their head, or would you rather they walk out with something that they can sort of say, well, now I understood that?
Again, a consolidation space.
Yeah, it might be better, if you can. Sometimes you can't help it, but even if you just consolidate, they not, but you consolidate, then yes. I'm sorry, but we've got to go on, but I really love to talk about this, because I found that every time I use it, it works for everything, so it's quite amazing. And most people have not heard of it, written about in the 50s. And it's just a marvelous model. Take a look at it from Google and it'll explain all that. Oh wait, I went really fast. All right, I'm gonna try to do this. This is my first PowerPoint ever. So I'm gonna try to do it right, whatever that means.
You can consolidate right now.
Thinking of leaving.
Consolidated at Starbucks together.
At the door. Okay, first of all, I spent most of my professional life separating politics from what I did. I was a behavior therapist, I studied family systems, and I just didn't think that politics should have anything to do with it. I was very much a feminist from the 60s. I didn't burn any bras because nobody did. That's just a really silly idea. But I was very feminist. I just didn't see what you did with, what could you do with it in a session. Part of the problem is that there's clear criteria for equality in the workplace. You can measure how much women are making versus men for the same job. You can, what are other ways you can talk about equality in the workplace?
Number of women in executive positions or management. Or
Glass ceiling, how many places have managed to do that? How many women are working, you know? I mean, in the 50s, there was something like 30% or 20%, and then in the 80s, it's like 80%. It's amazing, you know, change, huge change. Okay, so you can study that, but and people are and have been studying equality in the workplace. Now, what do you do when you're talking about home? Can you say, what is equality at home? First of all, you have the sanctity of the home. I mean, you can't have a law that says, like it does for the real world, you know, well, you actually have to share the dishes, and you actually have to share the garbage, and you have to share taking care of the children. The closest that I know that's come to something like that is Sweden. And I think they're struggling with it, saying that the man has to take a leave of absence for the child raising. Has to. It's the only country that I know that has done that. So it's almost like, and I think people who work with abuse in the home know the problem, that there's a sort of a door that shuts, and you're not supposed to really get into how people run their lives. And the other thing is that what is equality at home? Is it how many times he does the dishes? Is it how many times she gets up at night? Is it how much she earns versus him? Is it how many hours he works versus her? Is it how they decide things, like their power structured, you know, do they share decision-making? Is it fairness, a sense of fairness, a subjective sense of fairness? You know, things are just fair in our relationship. problem, and Arlie, have you heard of Arlene Hochschild and her book called The Second Shift? Came out, I think, in the 80s, and it's an ethnographic study of the home. You know, just the way she went and she interviewed stewardesses, she went and interviewed husbands and wives, and she found out that the big liberation for women has resulted in a second shift. Women work now full-time and they work at home. It's not such a great deal. So I began to feel very pressured about this. As I studied it more and more, I started to feel there's something really wrong with the field, family therapy. For instance, I went back and while I was thinking about this, and I looked how many case studies in the family literature has to do housework. 0. There were, when I looked, 0 amount of studies that even mention the word housework. You know, we were talking about differentiation of self, we were talking about triangles, we were talking about all kinds of ways to communicate. We weren't talking about who takes out the trash. It's like that was, that's petty, which is already the way, you know, is a sexist idea, because it says that what really concerns women is not as important as what really concerns men. And that the field is actually male-dominated, though women are the ones doing it, because the field is totally dominated by women. But they're not saying what's important to us is important to the field. And that made me really angry. And the other thing I noticed is that, and this is very powerful to have noticed this was a real jarring experience for me, which is that in the case studies, all the case studies, the discussion about the woman was much bigger than the discussion about the man. You know, when you'd be analyzing, and I even went back to my own case studies that I brought to my classes, and I was doing the same thing. You know, there'd be like a page and a half about the woman, and a quarter of a page about him. As if, well, we look at it as kind of blaming the woman in some way, because she's pathologized. We're talking all about her in so many ways, you know, her emotions, her this, her that, her past. The man is like this much, because you don't understand them maybe, because it's women writing the literature anyway. So maybe they don't really understand what's going on with them. There started to be articles on mother blaming that began to look back and say, hey, remember how it all started with family therapy? The schizophrenic mother. All started with blaming the woman. It's not something new. This has been going on for a long time. So I was getting very hyped up about this, and actually quite excited. Let's see if I can do this right. Okay, so I had a year off in Seattle. I was working with John Gottman and Pepper Schwartz, and on my way to them, I stopped at an AAMFT, American Association of Family, something. I don't know what the second A is. The Association of the American, something like that. It's a families therapy association. There were 4,000 people in Dallas, and I was on my way to do a year sabbatical. And I knew I wanted to do something with all these ideas that were flying around in my head. I was really feeling I had to do something. I didn't know what. So I'd go to every workshop that had to do with couples. And I was seeing the same couple in every single workshop. You know, it was amazing. Like if it was a psychodynamic workshop, or it was systems theory, or behavior therapy, or anything else, it would always have this story. The woman wants more contact and more intimacy than she's getting. She doesn't understand what he's thinking. She doesn't understand how he thinks. He thinks she's making a big deal out of nothing, and that actually things are fine, and she's the one ruining the relationship with all her complaining. That makes her even more angry, and the more angry she gets, the more she pursues him and tries to talk to him about it, the more distancing he gets. So that's the famous cycle that I was watching in every single place I went. There was actually, Andy Christensen gave a workshop on the pursuer-couple dance. You know, the more you pursue, the more the other one distances. The more the other one distances, the more you pursue. And the more, and this goes round and round. This is for sure, it works. I mean, I have a man in therapy who actually told us that he went out the bathroom window. He was so feeling so pressured, and she was following him everywhere, all around the house, that he finally just went out the window to the bathroom. So this is real. This is like really real. But Andy Christensen gives this workshop on the pursuer distancer, and I'm sitting in the back, and he does not mention that in most cases, the pursuer is the woman. And in most cases, the distancer is the man. And I was getting so angry, because I was really thinking about these things, and I was kind of obnoxious. I mean, I think back now, I wish I hadn't done that, but I said, how can you be talking about this without mentioning that in 90% of the cases, the ones pursuing are the women, and the ones, and 90% the other way, the men are distancing. Yes, that's probably true, but he didn't know anything about it. It's just like, it was sort of where I was in a way too. We didn't know what to do with it. We had this facts. I had gone to a conference that year in Holland on gender in the family, mostly sociologists and anthropologists, but there were some therapists as well. And I remember thinking that nobody knew what to do with this information. You have this information, there's tremendous sexism going on in the family. What do you do? And this is one of the sexist things going on in the family that we can describe, but what do you do about it? You tell the woman not to pursue? Well, how will that work if he doesn't start pursuing? Right? What if he doesn't want to do that? Like he's more interested in the computer and work and hobbies and running and the gym. So if she stops, you get to what we call separate lives, and eventually to divorce. So that doesn't work. So what does work? Okay, so now I want to talk about the research I did that year. The first study in Seattle, I put up a sign. I wanted to study egalitarian couples because the idea was I'd like to study people who think they've done it. Now, I always like that idea that you can learn more, not from the people who come to therapy so much, but learn more from people who feel they're doing well. I think it's a great idea in general. So I put up this sign and I said, I'm looking for egalitarian couples to be interviewed for a research study. That's all. I got hundreds of people who thought they were egalitarian. First big surprise. The other thing is that most of them had no children. They were students, and they were just living in the egalitarian lifestyle, but they didn't have a child. So I thought, this isn't going to be interesting enough, really. The real crunch comes when the children come. It's not that hard to be egalitarian when you're a student couple, right? So I took down those signs, I put up new signs, and the new sign said, I'm looking for egalitarian couples with children. And I still got like at least 100, maybe even more. So I started interviewing them. I have to give credit to my husband, who's entirely egalitarian, and he went with me on most of these interviews. He would be with me. First of all, it's very hard to go to these interviews. They were at night all over the Seattle area, finding people. It was really hard. Plus, when he would be in the room, the guy would talk much more than if I did it alone. So it was a lot of times, there's two of us and talking to a couple, and if it was good, we would come back another time. And that was about 100. And they said they were equal partners. Yeah. The next stage was in England on the way home. I knew somebody who was a marital therapist, and she gave me names of couples all over England, not just in London. And I traveled around, and I managed to interview 10 couples who said they were egalitarian. But this time I was really getting into it, because on the second I'll tell you about the method. The next stage was in Israel. And at that stage,
You can just press enter now.
managed to find 10 Arab Israeli couples who said they were egalitarian. It was really hard work to find them. And 60 Jewish Israeli couples who said they were egalitarian. And I use the same methods of analysis of the words and the text as with all of these. So there's a sense that you can do that. You can continue to look at the same variables as they come up in different cultures. And I did it according to a method by Corbin and Strauss called, what's it called? Rabin theory, where you keep interviewing until you have understood enough about one concept, and then you move on to another concept, and you keep doing it until you get to what they call saturation, where you really feel you've seen it. I got to a point after all of these couples where, somebody would just start to talk and I would know if they're really egalitarian or not. Because what started to become clear more and more over time was that there's happy egalitarian and unhappy egalitarians. The happy egalitarians were incredibly alike throughout the world. It was amazing how they said the same things. There were certain key phrases that I knew would be coming up, and it didn't matter where. And how similar they all were to each other. The unhappy couples, and I would say it's about half and half, were more like the kind of people that come for therapy. So I started thinking, and when I was writing a book about all this, that really you could turn this into a form of therapy, because most people who come to therapy today have one leg in the old traditions and one leg in the new world, and we're all moving in the same boat towards equality and kind of not really knowing how to do it. That's one way of saying, this is what I think is behind a lot of marital distress. You sit and talk to somebody who's into attachment, they'll say it has to do with attachment. Or if you talk to somebody who's interested in differentiation of the self, they'll say, no, it has to do with low differentiation of self. So I'm just saying one way to slice this cake of marital distress versus happiness is to look at it through the prism, through the eyes of gender equality, and I found that very useful. I'll talk more about how you use it, because you can't just say to somebody, hey, that's not fair. As a method, it doesn't work. This is more like how you think. You can't just suddenly jump in and say, well, I'll tell you how you deal with it, but it's not necessarily easy to deal with it. Okay. Oh yeah, I want to go on. So now what I want to share with you is the basic model that I created after all that, all those people. And it was written up in a book by Rutledge called Equal Partners, Good Friends, Empowering Couples Through Therapy. So I was trying to talk a kind of an empowerment model, a political model, a model that had to do with power struggles, and to make it into something you could think of therapeutically. And you can get that now on, what's it called? Something? eBay? Not eBay, it would be interesting to get it on
Amazon?
It's an ebook on Amazon.
ebook. Or ebook on any way that you want to get an ebook.
Sorry, what's the name of the book again?
But
What was the name of the book?
Equal Partners, Good Friends.
Thank you.
Okay? And I downloaded it. It was lovely to see that it could just arrive in 2 minutes. It's amazing. So, I'm going to hand this out because this is the way the model looks in the book, and it was very hard for us to figure out how to do this on PowerPoint. So, I'd like everybody to have one of these. Is everybody getting it? I played with that model for years and I'm trying to think how to make it make sense, In the center, you have basically what exists in the literature, the sociological literature. What exists and nothing new to be said about it, except that there's the possibility of seeing equality as a sharing of household and parenting tasks. That's one way you can look at it. And it certainly has to do with it. In fact, I'm not saying it doesn't. Equality might have something to do with power. Like, you can't just come home with a new car. You have to talk about it with your wife or husband, whatever, or partner. You can't just do these things without talking about it. Or say you're going to take a job in another city, or decide you're having another child. There's some things you just have to discuss. So that's the second way of thinking about it. It's power through decision-making. And then equality is also a subjective appraisal of the relationship as fair. It just feels fair. We ask each other if it feels fair to you. Does it feel fair to you if I do this, or does it feel fair to you if I do that? So those are three very different ways of thinking about equality, but if you will read the literature in sociology, you'll find all three of them. But at least you know that's the way it's talked about. What I did was then try to arrange all the themes that had come out of, it took about 10 years to do all this research. And all those themes that were coming, no, 6 years. All those themes that were coming out, I tried to put them in boxes, and the book is full of examples of these. I'll show you what they look like. Okay. As you see, that's up in the left, theme 1. The way I wrote it out is as if they become goals for therapy. Instead of just themes, I'm creating goals for therapy, so this can be a therapeutic model for you if you want it to be. One of the themes is helping couples be friends. This is a very important notion that equal partners who are happy talk a lot about friendship. In Israel, it was every couple. So there's something about Israeli life that makes them say, she's my best friend, he's my best friend. Friendship is crucial over there, so I guess that's why. But it was true in England, and it was true, not to the same extent to 100%, but certainly true in England, and it was true in Seattle. This is important if you stop to think about a funny research that was done around the time I was writing this, where they asked men and women, who are your three best friends? And the man invariably put his wife, his partner, female partner, as number 1. And only 1/3 of the women had him on the list at all. He wasn't even on the list. He wasn't number 1, he wasn't number 2, he wasn't number 3. 2/3 of the women didn't see him as a friend. That's what I'm saying. You look like amazed. That's what I'm getting. Is that possible? Are you surprised? It might be different today, because that was, a while ago, but it was in the 90s. But, so to say this person is my best friend, is, especially for women, is a huge change. And I tried to get at the themes that showed what friendship really was, not just saying, he's my friend, she's my friend. What was it? So I wrote friendship through shared experience. They talked a lot about the fact that they're interchangeable. Some of the couples have very traditional lifestyles. I'll give you a good example of a woman who stayed home, took care of the children, and the man was a student and earned some money. And she told us that she put herself on a 8-hour schedule during the day. And the reason for that is that it was so easy not to work hard when you're at home. Just to take a nap, watch the soaps, call a friend, go out, things like that. So she made herself work in the house for 8 hours because she said, if I didn't, whatever's not done, he would come and do. Just think about that concept. It's ethical self-monitoring that I don't want to abuse his friendship to me. And I have a lot of statements like that, and I find them very, very interesting. Friendship through a personal autonomy and emphasis on the individual. That's kind of what I was trying to say about taking responsibility for yourself and monitoring yourself. Am I doing enough? I'll give you an example of a guy who did the opposite so that you see, because with all of these I have the opposites as well. These are goals for therapy so that you're using it to help people become more egalitarian. But I also have examples of this half that were trying to be egalitarian but were making quite a mess of it. So this is an example of a guy who said the reason he was egalitarian is because that was the way you got girls when he went to college. Okay? And he had this game going on that he actually seemed to enjoy, in which he would watch her. They'd both come home from work. He'd watch her doing all the chores, getting tired, getting upset. He'd watch. He'd be watching TV with his feet up. And he's telling all this with her sitting right next to him. So just imagine what it sounds like. And then he said, and I got it down to an exact science. 5 seconds before she explodes, I get up and go do something. Yeah. And I'm getting it down to really like the moments. It's a game for him. Kind of a power trip. Okay. It's kind of a power trip, you know. Let's see if I can get her, if I can get away with not doing anything. Well, let's see how fast I can get away with not doing anything. And then friendship by overcoming gender ambivalence. I call gender ambivalence, I'll give you an example of what I would call gender ambivalence. There's a woman who's a doctor. She brings in a lot of money, and she does everything in the house, and he brings in money, and he does everything in the house. And we're going to talk about communications pretty good. But she, when they have financial problems, she sleeps through the night just fine. You know, she's not worried. He's the one who's worried. He talked about being up at night, are they going to make them mortgage, are they going to be able to do things? He's carrying that burden. And I call it gender ambivalence, meaning that you sort of have one foot in new things and another foot in old ways, and you take, paste and match what you want to take to the new world and what you want to still keep from the old world. They don't necessarily match. Another example of gender ambivalence, it's actually called this now in the literature, is gatekeeping, which is where women are asking men to come in and help with the children, but then telling him he doesn't know how to do it, and she'll do it herself because she does it better. So now it's called gatekeeping. It's actually got a phrase, which is nice. So I put all those things, and I found lots of examples in the book you'll see about this gender ambivalence, where people are saying one thing, but they're doing another, because it's just not it's not a tight system yet. Okay? That's empowerment. We got to that one. Okay, empowerment, I call it the transformation. In almost all cases, the woman in the marriage went through something and she changed. Now, I'll talk about it in a second, that there are women who divorced because of the lack of equality and then came into a second marriage, much more already an equal partner with the husband, and the husband wanting her to be an equal partner. So that's one way of getting there. But the transformation is something that I just didn't expect and found in reading these transcripts, that these women had, let's say, a major illness, let's say like breast cancer, they lost a parent, they'd gone into therapy, they were in Overeaters Anonymous, things happened, and their consciousness was raised. Their consciousness was raised to their own rights, to their own giving to themselves. The reasons were very different, but the results were always this kind of transformation. I mean, I deserve more than I'm getting right now. Okay? Coping with women's anger, learning to embrace bitchiness, that has to do with the fact that as women transformed, they got angrier and angrier. And there are funny examples throughout the book, like where the guy is sitting with friends while the woman is in the kitchen, and she gets so pissed off that she takes the wash and she goes into the living room where he's sitting with friends and dumps it on his head. But see, the thing that was good in this example is that he laughed. He thought it was really funny. And he said, I deserved it. And that made him change. It made him stop and think. So coping with women's anger is like, has to come. If you're going to have the transformation, the woman is generally going to start seeing that she's not getting an equal fair deal here. And she's going to come out after him, and if he is able to laugh about it, enjoy it, deal with it, then she can move on. Where does she need to move on to? To convincing. There's a guy in the 70s named Scanzoni, who's a sociologist. And he was the first one writing about egalitarian marriages. And he said, in egalitarian marriages, everything is open to negotiation, except that everything is open to negotiation. So I think that's just great, you know? It's the fact that you don't have, nothing is a sacred cow. It doesn't matter if your mother did it or your father did it or that's just how you feel. You can convince the other person and try to convince the other person. There's a lot of dialogue going on with these couples. And honoring the feminine, that's part of the empowerment. I mean, if the woman's job is, let's say, to stay home with the kids most of the time, and she's not earning a lot of money, and the husband sees that as, I don't know, how would I even call it? You know, he comes home, he's earned a lot of money, he's worked very hard, and it's now 8 o'clock at night, she's home with the kids. So he puts his feet up and he goes to sleep or watches TV. You may not see that as not honoring the feminine. That was my idea, but that's called not honoring the feminine. I'll give you an example of the opposite. When I sat with a couple where she was in education, she came home every day at 2 or 3 o'clock. Kids there were 2 or 3 little kids. He was a doctor. He came home at 7 or 8, and then he told how he continued all the time. You know, he came home exhausted, but he didn't lie down. He started to help her with the dinner, help with the washing up, with the kids going to bed, reading stories, all that stuff till 10, 11 o'clock, okay? And I was new to this at that point. This was like the second couple. And I said to him, well, you work all day until 8, and then you come home and you continue working. How do you explain that? He said, well, do you know what it's like to bring up 2 little children? And that was a statement that was like, wow. I said, yeah, I do. I never thought of it as equal to. I think that what we're talking about with equality, one of the many things we're talking about, is that the job that women do, the feminine, which can be other things too, we'll talk about it, is equal to what the man does, regardless of the money being paid for it. We're not in a society that gives her money for taking care emotionally of the family. Because emotional work is just, well, she just does that. Even in a university setting or any other setting, the secretaries often do the emotional work, and it's not recognized. Nobody gets a little extra money for that. Right? Remembering birthdays, calling to people who are sick, putting up announcements, and people, all this emotional work that women do, that don't get paid for. It's invisible work, you know? And it can be also for his family, not just for her family. And it's not paid for, and it's not valued. So these couples have taken it and turned it around. What's so beautiful about them and what was so exciting, what kept me working on it for so long, was that these are people who took what society said and turned it all on its face. You know, they sort of said, you don't have to do it that way. You can do it another way. Okay. Are there any questions at this point so far? This is the crucial part, the gender gap in communication, because that's the one thing I would say, I didn't put it in any special place, but it's certainly one thing that if that isn't working, nothing's going to work. Men tend to avoid intimate conversation. Anybody who wants to read about it should go to a book by Stephen Bergman, and he calls it Male Dread. He thinks men, he's a psychiatrist in Boston. He's part of, have you heard of the Stone Group, the Stone Center? Jean Baker Miller. Wow, it's on the same country? Oh, no, it's on the same country, it's Canada. Well, that's a center for feminist thinking in Wellesley, and he's part of that. And basically what he says is that men they're not just afraid of talking about intimacy, they're absolutely in terror of talking about intimacy. His whole book is based on the idea of dread. And he has a long list of the parts of dread that men think that if they start getting into a conversation with a woman who's angry, nothing good will come out of this. I'm not going to know what to say. She's totally right, but I don't know how to answer her. I mean, I could spend the whole session now just telling you about this male dread, because it's this horrible feeling apparently that men get. I don't know if any of the men in this room relate to this, because I personally never felt male dread. But she's saying that that is very, very common, that nothing good is gonna happen. The best thing to do is be quiet, get away, calm things down, calm her down, close it up. So obviously, we're talking about the pursue a distancer again, from the male perspective. Now, this is the most common thing I found in couples. Like, this is the thing that I would say is almost 100% true. When I traveled around the world, and I would be in a third world country, like I was in India and I was in Kenya, I found it among the men in there too. As a matter of fact, they call it the problem. Many couples just say, it's the problem. Like one couple, and we sat down, and first thing we asked them is, what is egalitarianism? That was always the first question. What is equal partnership to you? And this one woman says, well, it's when he talks to me. That's pretty clear, Another woman said, well, we sit at the kitchen table, and I know that I have something to tell him, and he knows that I have something to tell him. And I know that he knows, and he knows that I know that he knows. And he doesn't go away. That is so cool. These are women, you see, it's not just his learning to deal with it. These are women who are also training and helping and mentoring and not expecting the impossible. I remember a couple where he hardly said one word in the whole interview. She was talking, and here and there. We got to the door, and she said, "Isn't he great? You can't imagine how much he's improved." Okay. He said 3 words. Maybe in the past he said 1 word. I don't know. So celebrating differences is crucial because women and men in our communication are not the same. Now, it is true, if anyone wants to say it, it is true, they've told me, that there are cases of the opposite, where it's the man wants to talk and the woman is quiet or closes down or whatever, and I'm sure there are. I personally didn't run into any in this group, but I know that there's always the opposite. There's always something that doesn't fit the rules. Always. So, we can't hold on to this too tight. Just say, let's hold it loosely, and if you run into a man who's dying to talk all the time, and a woman who keeps cutting it off, we'll know what it looks like. It's just the opposite, that's all. And celebrating differences comes from the fact that these are couples who think it's funny, and they think it's cute, and they think it's okay. One man said, every 6 months she gets really pissed at me because I don't talk enough. And it makes me really look at myself and try to do better. And I'm so glad she's not doing it more often than once every 6 months. So I just love that phrase. That is so powerful. And on one hand, yes, you have to push it. On the other hand, if you make it a daily thing, it's going to really turn the whole marriage upside down and not be much fun. So I like that. And then there's one more thing was a surprise. Yeah, this is really important mostly because it was such a surprise. And every couple that I interviewed, whether they were Seattle, whether they're from England, whether they're from the Arab couples or the Jewish couples, had some belief in something that was bigger than themselves. And I'm talking about the happy ones, okay? I'm not talking about the ones who are not happy. They were working towards getting, like in the Arab population, they were working towards getting a road built to their village. In the Jewish population, they were working, volunteering there's a lot of road accidents, so there's an organization against road to try to improve the statistics. So they're working on that. In Seattle, there were people who were very involved with Baha'i. There were people that were very into Black pride. There were people that were very into making sure the area was free of drugs that they lived in. So what's the common thread? And you think, why would that be connected to equality? What is this ideology thing here? Any ideas? Why would suddenly you find these people so ideological? It's not that complicated, really. It's because if you believe in something bigger than yourself, you're able to believe in something bigger than yourself about your marriage as well. I always love the phrase that I see in England, you know, mind the gap. You ever seen that, mind the gap in England? The gap is between what you believe and what you do. Now, if you believe in equality, you probably believe in all people's rights for equality, not just your partner. It's something that goes beyond the two of us, and that holds it in place, because it's a much deeper belief than just, I want to be with my wife. I want the whole world to be a better place. And often what I heard was men, especially, who had been different all their lives. They could remember being the one who tried to break up fights in the playground. They hated bullying. There were often men who felt closer to their mothers than to their fathers, and did not feel they had to make a cut from their mothers. They felt okay about it. They identified with women. They identified with the underdog. They were angry at oppression wherever they saw it. Doesn't it make sense that it would be part of a whole, you know, it's not just you see your wife in that or your partner, it's you see everybody as part of that. And that keeps it going too. Questions, thoughts about this? Is it too much material at one time or what? Okay? So then what I did was I went home to Israel after all this, and I started working the next 10 years after that with my doctoral and master's students. The first thing we did was put together a package. I left the qualitative research. Well, I mentioned if you really want to get into qualitative research, it's fascinating, but it's very hard. You have to analyze line after line after line. You have to get to some kind of congruity between somebody else who's going to do that, and it's hard. But not just because of that. I really think that qualitative research, when it works well, like this grounded theory, it gives you material and ideas and variables that you can use now for quantitative work. And that's what I did, is I took the qualitative ideas that came out of this study, turned them into questionnaires, and went on doing research for the next 10 years with my students on equality and almost anything else in the world. What we were looking at, whatever happened to interest them. So the first thing was getting this package of what equality would look like. So we took the following variables, and for each one of them there's a questionnaire. Some which already existed, some which we had to make and validate, and liability and all that, but a lot of them were already around. One is your ideology about gender equality. Do you think women have a right to work outside the home? Do you think it's okay if men take care of the babies? You know, it's a good questionnaire about ideology. So that's one aspect. Next aspect was, how do you share the housework? 50-50 or not 50-50, we wanted to know. And it's a questionnaire that goes through every little thing that happens at home, you know? It's like the child work, the scrubbing up, the shopping, everything, maintenance of the lawn. It's a real long questionnaire. And the next one is power, decision-making. It's a shorter questionnaire, but it's about how do you make decisions, together or separately. Can you make it all by yourself, or do you always talk with each other? And the next one was fairness. The fairness was the easiest to do because it was simply on a scale of 1 to 7, how fair do you think your relationship is? Because it's very subjective. It's completely subjective. Is it fair or isn't it fair? We tried different versions of it. We tried one, there is a version that came out of Holland that is, I give as much as I get, or how much I give is about equal to what I get, and that's true for him too, but it was too complicated. People didn't understand them. So we simply said 1 to 7, how fair is your relationship? And people just knew, they just knew. And then the last thing was sharing, was the last thing. Yeah, the last thing is very important. Last thing was happiness, marital happiness. Because all along the way, what?
try to wrap up in about 5 minutes or so,
You're kidding. 5 minutes?
if possible, or soon thereabouts.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the last thing we looked at was marital happiness. Now that's a study, the first study we did was with 120 Israeli couples. We looked at all those variables. You know, the ideology, the power, the housework, the fairness, and the happiness. Because what we're really interested in at that point was what predicts happiness. If it's just, you know, if equality doesn't predict happiness, it's sort of like, I think we should forget the topic or move on to something else. And it did, very much so, predicted happiness. And by that time, a lot of other researchers were doing the same thing. And no question, from every respect, men who do home housework, gotten found this, are happier with their marriages. So we also found that. The ideology about feminism had absolutely no influence, meaning that everybody pretty much believes in it, and it didn't differentiate between anybody or anybody else. You know, just people generally believe that women have the right to work and they have the right to self-fulfillment, and so they say that, but that doesn't mean anything about what's going to happen after that. So it wasn't related to anything else. The interesting thing is that the biggest predictor, I guess with this I'll have to stop, the biggest predictor for happiness was fairness. It certainly wasn't the division of the household labor, you know, cleaning up, and it wasn't the decision making. But there's a very interesting and challenging finding here, because when there was fairness, when there was a sense of fairness, both men and both women predicted and talked about happier marriages. So they were connected. But if the marriage was 50-50 in terms of household and in terms of decision-making, then the women were generally feeling that it was fair, and so they were happier. When it was 50-50 household sharing and sharing of decisions, the men thought it was not fair, and they were not happy. They were less happy. So we wrote an article that was published that was called Women and Men on a Collision Course. Because if fairness is what makes you feel good, it makes you feel happy. If it's fair, it makes you feel happy. But if you think it's fair one way, and the other one thinks it's fair another way, then you've got something going on there that you're going to have to deal with in therapy or one way or another, right? He doesn't think it's fair. One of the reasons is that men tend to compare themselves to other men. So whatever they do, it always seems like a bit more than their neighbors. Women tend to compare themselves to their own husbands. They say, how much do I do and how much does he do? And she winds up feeling she does more. So that even that would create a different fairness, because they're using different criteria for, you know, I'm better than the next guy, but she's saying, but look at all I'm doing. So they're not even talking the same language. And the book tries to show you how to use this in therapy, which would be another lecture. How to take this into the therapy room, what are ways that you can do it. I'm not the only one now who writes about it, because there became many, many women who became interested in writing about it. And they had a women's coalition, Peggy Powell, Olga Silverstein, Betty Carter, Lupnitz, I think her name was Judith Lupnitz, Deborah Lupnitz. There's a whole literature, there's even a journal called Feminist Family Therapy. So it's become a real thing. And now when you go to a conference, you're going to find a lot on gender. And a lot of workshops will be talking about gender issues. So we've started. I guess I just want to end by saying, how do you think about gender? And I thought about it in a way that I think will help you. Think about gender as you would think about racism, ageism, homophobia, ethnic stereotypes. I mean, all these are in the room with you when you're treating somebody. If you make it part of your work, to look at that and to think about that. You know, for instance, when I'll work with a couple, and I notice that she's from a what we call Mizrahi background. She comes from the Arab states, Algeria, Morocco, and so on. And he comes from European background. Now, already I know there's a power imbalance there, because the Moroccan, Algerian people in Israel do not have the same status as the other ones. I'll ask about who's earning more money. I'll ask who has the biggest family, and how important is that to them. So I'm thinking power all the time. So gender is just one more of those issues that you can think about. It's in the room if you want it to. I mean, it's there, but do you want to look at it or not? Sometimes it would be completely the wrong thing to do. People are crying and some tragedies happen. Gender isn't really, at the moment, what you're going to be talking about. So you can have it in your mind, you can forget it, but it'll come back if it's something about the way you want to work with diversity. It's a different form of diversity. Ageism, sexism. Any comments? I have to stop now, so I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm going to be doing this again in an hour, so you can tell me, please change something. That would be helpful too. Any feedback would be helpful.
I actually have a question. You mentioned the terms equality and fairness, and what's the difference in your statement between those two terms?
Well, it's like how you define it. Equality is, for instance, one of the things in equality is who does what and how decisions are made. And you could say fairness is a part of equality, feeling things are fair. It's a huge, broad umbrella, equality. It's like defining it is the problem itself.
Right, so in addition to fairness, what are the other components in equality?
So sharing decision-making, sharing household, honoring all those other things, honoring the feminine. And I tried to show it as a system that worked together, because when it's all working, each part of the system supports other parts of the system. And I've never seen couples as happy as those who've managed to really do that. Amazingly happy. Yeah. Did you want to say something?
No, I'm just wondering if people are having the same response that I am, that while you're talking, you're thinking about your own relationship, but then you're also thinking about the couples with whom you're working. As there's, I don't know what that process is called, but anyway, it was happening for the last hour.
Intersensitivity or something.
Yeah, so very, very interesting. We're awfully lucky to have you here telling us about this, because otherwise we get very little of this in our program here. 1 3-hour thing on, 1 hour talk on feminist family therapy. If you take it.
I teach this in our school, and I teach this in the whole course.
That'd be great.
Yeah, the whole course, because it's just each one of these things that we discussed, you can get into so much more. A lot of exercises I like to do, which show win-win, win-lose, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it gets to couples' problems from a new angle. And also, I do want to say one thing before I forget. Other people have been taking this idea and now trying it out in terms of differentiation of self or attachment, and it's all related. In other words, to become an egalitarian person, you also need to be a mature person. You need to be an assertive person. Your attachment has to be good. And I think that's very, very important. And also, we don't know which direction it works. Is it that you try to become egalitarian, and that makes you more mature? Is it that the more mature people then can be egalitarian, the more differentiated, the better attached? It's very interesting which way does it work, but they're all connected. There's no doubt about it. They're all connected.
Are there any other questions?
I have another question.
I think it's brilliant as a woman's perspective, but I always wonder, how do male clients, maybe male colleagues, how do they see this theoretical background? How do they feel that they fit into it? I'm just wondering if some men feel that it really puts them off, or how many?
In general, people don't like to be classified. Like, not just men, women don't. I'm Claire. another woman, I'm Claire. So in general, you have to learn how to talk about this in a way that isn't stigmatizing. Like, oh, you Chinese, or it's you women, or you men. You can't talk like that. So a lot of the book is how to talk about it. One of the ways, what Lynn was saying, is that one of the ways you talk about it is by you're all in the same boat. Because anyway, feminism is kind of an equalizer, transparent way of looking at things. You say, in my life, it's been really hard to work this and this out. And you're much more open in this way of working than you would be if you were working dynamically. You talk about your marriage, you talk about the problems you've had, you talk about how you overcome it. You say we're all in the same boat. Nobody's gotten there yet. We're all work in process. When it comes to egalitarian stuff, we're all work in process. I really believe that. I saw some couples that wowed me, but they were like really few that were so egalitarian and so happy. And I could tell I'd come in the room and there'd be music on in most of these places. The atmosphere was so calm. And one of these houses, the woman was taking crack babies and nurturing them and then giving them, as they went through withdrawal. And yet the atmosphere at home was just incredible. So, I know there's something to aim for. And I don't think it's easy to get there. And a lot of the elements are there, dealing with your bitchiness, dealing with your anger.
Embracing. Embracing.
Embracing. You like that?
Love that.
I made that up.
I'm just wondering in terms of same-sex couples, how, sort of, to move on from here, what it would be like to have to do this kind of study with 2 women and 2 men.
We did.
When you've got 2 distancers or 2 pursuers or whatnot.
We did do it.
How does that work? And that would be very, that was like an interesting sort of step in the process.
We did that. There's one student who interviewed 5 committed lesbian relationships and 5 committed gay relationships. And first of all, they're more egalitarian than the heterosexuals in general. They didn't play the role, really not. The thing that was sad about it, in a way, or at least makes you stop and think, is that the differences that society has for men and women were true in terms of the couples, if they were women or they were men. Like the men, they never cleaned up, they got maids. They were often making more money than the women, and they took maids to help them. They had wills that they had made, leaving things to each other. They had organized their property, mutual property. The women had none of that stuff. The women didn't know how they were going to get through the month, most of them. Like the difference between men and women was much more, the 2 men have so much more going for them in terms of, working out the economics. And the women just seem to be like, everything is about feelings. Everything's about feelings. And not everything's about feelings. Some things are about eating. Then you got the problem of bed death. Has anybody heard about that idea? Yeah. The women really suffered from that. It was the end of sexuality that nobody had figured out why. Because it wasn't true of the men at all. Men were much more open to having affairs and stuff like that. That was fine. But for women, it was very sad. So there's a lot to be said about all this, but they didn't have the equality problem. Maybe they have the gender problem. They didn't have the equality problem. Yeah.
I'm curious how this model would work, do you think, in very multicultural societies? So if you're dealing with couples who bring in, let's say immigrant couples who bring in their own concepts of equality, let's say ethnic Chinese immigrants to Vancouver, for example. So there's multiple layers there. There's what they're bringing in. There's what they see in society as a whole. How does it work when there's these different layers that are brought into?
Well, we had the 10 Arab men, and they were all the Arab guys were the ones that brought the egalitarianism into the couple. Not one was the woman, which was not true at all for the Americans or the English or the Jewish Israelis. It's like in a really traditional culture, if the man doesn't want to do it, they're not going to do it. And I have that in other slides coming up later, but we don't have time for them. That there were cultural differences, and that if the men understood the point, wanted it, these were often men who had traveled and had gone and studied in different places, and they came home and they wanted a woman who really could talk to them. But I would say that egalitarianism and equality is a question for everybody. So why actually, why would be more of a question for one group? It's just a different question. It's always a question. We haven't got it down pat, It's not like we've got it down pat and they're all traditional. We're sort of confused. There's a lot of conflict. But I wrote one paper which I can send to anybody who wants it on the cultural side of all this. And the other thing is that anybody who wants to study this, I would be very happy to help you with that and look at that, whatever I could do, because I'm really fascinated by this work.
Now, a PhD.
Does that mean I'm accepted?
Yes.
I got in. Oh, thanks, Mom.
What?
You just said no PhD. I said, does that mean I got accepted? Yeah.
Well, on behalf of our department, Educational Counseling, Psychology, and Special Education, we'd really like to thank you, Dr. Rabin, for spending the afternoon with us. And again, this lecture will be repeated at 2:30. And thanks very much to Catherine Clayback for organizing everything, and for everybody here for your kind attention. So thank you very much.